So here in the UK, we're having quite the hot spring so far, and I've just found myself wanting a white watch more and more to match my trainers. And at the same time, I've also found myself wearing this little thing more and more. This is the Casio F91WB, and it's basically this new minimalist looking version of the classic F91. As far as features and functions and, well, materials go, it's identical to the original, but it just looks that little bit cleaner and I think a little bit more stylish, even if it does lack a bit of character. And as such, I figured, you know what, why don't I do the old person thing? You know, if you like something, buy it in every single colour. You know what, why not get the white version of this? So I headed online and boy oh boy, I struggled to find one. Yeah, it turns out that the white version of the F91WB is sold out pretty much everywhere. So I was forced to do a little bit of a cursed thing here in the UK. I had to buy a watch from Sports Direct. Yeah, this was pretty much the only place that had this watch in stock. Sports Direct doesn't exactly have the best reputation, but hey, they seem to have shipped the watch, so I'll pop this open, give him my first impressions, and if it's any good, this would be, I think, my first white watch ever, or at least my first white cased watch. So yeah, I'll try and link this in the video description. Hopefully, by the time you're seeing this, it's available at some slightly less controversial outlets. Sports Direct don't have the best reputation for employee satisfaction, shall we say. But who knows, maybe in recent years they've changed their ways. Boy oh boy, have they packed this securely, I have to give them that. And I knew from the second I first saw these watches that they were going to be popular. But I didn't quite expect them to be this popular, perhaps. Here we go, looks like it is the correct watch. Love the sea and the earth. And here we go. Could be my first ever white watch. Now, how long do you think it'll be before some of the AliExpress brands start to copy this one? Not very long, I suspect. And there we go, exactly as expected. Now, there is one thing I'm really intrigued to find out with this watch. Will this white resin discolor over time? Now, I've got a feeling it probably will. How badly it does, well, I guess that remains to be seen. But yeah, I'll certainly be putting that to the test. And I guess the advantage of watches like the F91 is if they do fade quite badly, well, at least you haven't spent too much on them. Now, this watch currently, it's still more expensive than the standard F91. And I'm assuming that's just because it's not as widely available on grey market sites. You know, it hasn't been out for very long either. That said, it is still pretty cheap as far as watches go these days. I think in total with delivery, I spent about £23 on this. Perhaps in a few years it'll be even cheaper. Who knows? Maybe with inflation it won't be. So for context, for those of you who are considering this watch, here's just the brief sizes. Now these square watches, they kind of wear differently to anything else really. Without the pushers here, you're looking at a width of about 34.4. Although square watches do tend to wear a little bit larger than that. If it was a round watch, I'd say it wears more like about a 36, maybe 36 and a half. Lug to lug is still very short though, even with those hooded lugs. Wow, 37.5. Yeah, really quite short. At least it's thin though, 8.4-ish. And the specs on this, well, it's an acrylic crystal, plastic case, and it's got your basic functions. It's got alarm on there, stopwatch, which works just as you'd expect, and you can reset it. And then you can make adjustments to these as well. You also do have the world's most awful backlight, which you can, well, maybe not see there. But I have to say, I do think the watch looks good. I'm glad I picked this one up. Do you think I'm going to get a lot of use out of this summer? I mean, we've been having a real heat wave so far, at least by UK standards. Now, something I will point out is that the display in this one is actually pretty good, really. The F91's display has always been one of its strengths. It is clear in most scenarios. What you'll notice if I turn it to the left here is, because my polarizing filter, it seems to go invisible, or black at least, but in the flesh, it just looks normal. That's just a result of my camera filter there. In fact, you ready for the old magic trick? There we go. That's how it actually looks. Let's give it a try on, eh? Oh, I do think that looks really good on the wrist, actually. It's pretty clean and simple, and that's always been my style, to be fair. Do you think I'm going to get a lot of use out of this, matching it with white shoes and the like? Now, there is one minor downside, actually, that I've gradually noticed about the F91 that I don't think many people talk about. And it's nothing major, but it is a tiny bit annoying, and that is to do with the strap. It's actually not the quality of the strap. I think the quality of the strap is quite serviceable considering the price of the watch. These do last a pretty long time just by themselves. But more specifically, it's the gaps between the holes. Now, it's not awful, and you get a gap every, what, about 6.5 millimeters there, maybe 7 millimeters. So that isn't terrible. But I have to say, with the F91s, I do find myself, at least at my current weight and wrist size, sitting between the holes in effect. So I can either go on this hole, and then the watch is just that tiny bit loose. But then if I move to the next hole, it's definitely too tight, as you can see here from the pressure lines, and it's suddenly really tight. So that's the only thing I would change about these Casios. If that gap, instead of 6.5, were more like perhaps 4.5 or 4 millimeters, I think everyone would be covered off then, and you'd be guaranteed a comfortable fit. And while I don't think it's a problem for most people, and I'm going to be fussier than most people given that this whole watch thing is my job, but it's certainly a little nitpick that at some point I wish they would alter, because I don't think it'll cost them a great deal of money to change. But overall, still happy, still definitely going to get some wear out of this. Maybe I need to do some more sit-ups, either that or start eating a bit more ice cream. But yeah, it's linked below. Code name for this is F91WB-1AEF. Quite a mouthful.